Don talked about the different lifestyles of Joshua and Caleb. And if you think about it, they actually experienced 3 different seasons. They had been in Egypt, making bricks without straw. They had been in the wilderness, and then they were in the Promised Land. And there is a landscape to our lives spiritually. There's a spiritual landscape. And we talk about our walk with God in those terms. I'm on the mountaintop. I'm down in the valley. I'm in a dry place. We talk about our walk with God in terms of geography. And so there's always a certain landscape to wherever you happen to be at the time. And if you compare the 3 seasons or landscapes or lifestyles that Joshua and Caleb successfully navigated, there were millions of people that were in different parts, but some people left behind. One of the things when they came out of Egypt was the emotional connection to Egypt. They kept wanting to go back. They kept pining to go back. Sometimes we want to go back to where we've been before, not because it was so wonderful, but because it's so familiar to us. It's a nostalgia that gets a hold of us. And I thought about that. Why were they in Egypt in the first place? They were in Egypt in the first place because of a famine.
Yeah.
God sent Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, go to Canaan. Abraham left Canaan, went to Egypt, got in trouble, and came out tremendously wealthy. Isaac wanted to go to Egypt when he was in trouble, and God met him along the way and said, don't do it, don't go. And it said Isaac sowed in the land in a time of famine and reaped 100-fold return in the same year. If we understand the principle of first mention in the Bible, it's a theological principle of biblical inquiry, that the first time something is mentioned in the Bible becomes an interpretive guide or authority for interpreting that subject throughout the Bible. Well, the first mention of the 100-fold return was not a preacher taking up an offering.
Surely not.
It was about somebody staying where God put them and doing something very ridiculous. He sowed in the land in a time of famine, when everybody that was in the agricultural business had gone out of business, and many of them had starved to death and buried their children. And Isaac sowed in that land and reaped 100-fold return in the same year. And but then Jacob, same thing. Abraham faced a famine, dealt with it a certain way. Actually dealt with it very inappropriately, and came out smelling like a rose, came out blessed, came out with the foundation laid for who he became. Isaac was going to follow in his daddy's footsteps to Egypt. This is what daddy did. We got a famine. What did daddy do? No, won't do that. God said, don't do that. Stay here. So we can't do something just because daddy did it, or because someone who speaks leadership to us did it that way. He did that. That worked out for him. And now Jacob. Time of famine. Joseph has been in Egypt. And now God, through Joseph's leadership, brought all the patriarchs and their families to Egypt for 430 years. And so when we think about Egypt, that is the land or the season of necessity. How many of you have ever found yourself doing something out of necessity? I don't want to do this, but I must do this. I'm going to have to do this. This was not what I see. They were in the place that God said, I'm going to make you ruler. I'm going to give all this to you. But 3 generations later, they're forced out of the being in the very place where God sent them. Of necessity, they're forced out. Without explanation. God didn't explain it to them. He just said, now go to Egypt. And actually raised up Joseph to protect them without explaining himself. Because he's God, he's bigger than we are, and he knows more. Well, God, I thought you said, yeah, I did. I know when I've questioned God on stuff like that, God, I thought you said, yes, that is what I said. Well, have you changed that? And he doesn't answer that question. He just says, do you trust me? Let me take it from here. I remember God told me something. I unimpeachably told me something. I knew God told me something. Didn't work out that way. And I spent 9 months, I felt like I was living in a tomb. Every day I felt like I woke up in a casket and lived my life in a tomb, surrounded by death, despair, and emotional agony. And all God would ever say to me was, do you trust me? Let me take it from here. And so here they go to Egypt for 430 years. So this is the land of necessity. Of necessity, we do things sometimes. And that necessity is dealing with the contradiction between what God said and what we're experiencing. Most people get scandalized right there. All that prophecy, throw that prophecy away. I don't care what they say God said. Because we don't like living with the tension of having a disparity between what we're hoping for and what we're experiencing, so we just give up. And Joshua and Caleb were a product of 400 years of that kind of thinking. But the other side of it is realize that in the land of necessity is great authority. I went to work for a medical management company back in the mid-90s because God told me to leave. I had reached the pinnacle of my clerical career as a clergyman. I was the number 2 guy in my denomination. I was about to become the number 1 guy, the chief overseer of my denomination. And in the midst of that, God said, resign. Clearly said it to me, confirmed it by someone that I hadn't seen for 4 years. Called my brother up, gave him a prophecy, said, go play that for your brother. And his prophetic word confirmed exactly what God told me to do. I walked away from the very zenith of my career as a minister, about to take over 900 churches, and the mission work, and all the ministers. And wound up working in a medical management company. When I went there, I started out as a low-level technician. Within 3 months, I was the vice president of the company. The people that knew the man who was the head of the company, they said, no one has held your position longer than 3 months, ever, in this business. God prospered me there. I had a Joseph experience. Everything I put my hand to. I took that company, we saw their gross sales multiply by 10-fold during the 3.5 years I was there. And I was directly responsible for it. But yet it was the most inveterate, pagan atmosphere that you could ever imagine. It would scandalize you if you knew the details of what God put me in and the situations I was in and what was involved in how I made my living. It wasn't immoral, it was just a very pagan atmosphere. And my boss would call me in, he said, I want you to know that when you come in here, you check your religion at the door, because in this place, I am God, you will follow my theology. And I'd just laugh in his face. I would say, Henry, does that mean you want me to genuflect when I come in your office? And he'd try and get mad at me, and he couldn't. He'd turn red and cuss me out and tell me to get out of his office. I got cussed at for a living. People say, what do you do for a living? I get cussed at. Because I'd be on the phone about 4 hours a day listening to Henry cuss. And But yet God blessed me there. God made me a Joseph there. I was the doer of anything that was done in that place of business, just like Joseph. That's the season of necessity. It's not about people plowing you under and you're not getting your way and you're just, no, that the season of necessity, if you listen to the voice of God, is the place where you receive promotion, enlargement, increase, and authority. And obviously, Joseph and Caleb knew how to do that. And then there's the season of transition, the wilderness. That's always longer than you want it to be. But usually not for reasons that have to do with God, but have to do with us. Just like it was for the children of Israel. 10 days turned into 10 days in 1 month. They were going to stop off and receive the commandments. So 40 days, what should have been 40 days, turned into 40 years. Not by God's design, but by as a consequence of their choices. You got to know how to. And Joshua and Caleb had to figure out how to survive that without being so scandalized and offended, because their life and the disposition of their life was controlled by the decisions of others made in unbelief. And they had to put up with the consequences for 40 years without getting bitter, angry, and losing out with God because of it. So from necessity to transition to conquest. Canaan was the season of conquest. And when they came out of Canaan, they went from manna on the ground every morning, water from the rock, to you're not eating till you kill that giant. When the manna ceased, something's wrong. The manna ceased. We're out of God's will. It's a sign that we're out of God's favor. No. No, God's just requiring. And so there are things that come to you like falling out of bed. These blessings that come to you like falling out of bed, all of a sudden now, you got to get it on according to another dynamic. Go kill a giant. Go do a lot of other things. One understanding of that is how Moses solved problems. Problem solving in the wilderness was, when you're in the wilderness, you solve your problem on your face. People would give Moses a problem, he would fall on his face, the earth would open up and swallow them. Joshua didn't fall on his face in Canaan land. You solve your problems on your face in the wilderness, you solve it on your feet in Canaan land. Two different ways of solving problems. The name Joshua is really interesting. It means, it's a compound word. The first part is Jehovah, Yahweh. It's the covenant name of God. It's saying God's in covenant with me. And then the second part, which is Jehovah is salvation, but it comes from a root word meaning open, to be opened, to be wide, to be liberated, to have victory, to be preserved, to be delivered, and rendered safe. It's being brought to liberty. See, it's having this, where's God taking me? He's bringing me to liberty. He's bringing you into a wide place, and we taught on that today. When you're under pressure, it's because God's seeking to bring you to promotion. God, what are you doing? He said, God, you have increased me in a time of trouble. Psalm 4. You've increased me in a time of trouble. When you're feeling the pressure, God, what are you doing? I'm increasing you. I'm promoting you.
Oh, yeah.
But we've got to have a Joshua and Caleb mentality to think that's what he's doing. Have that default baseline understanding is not questioning God, how come I don't like this and I'm blaming you for it. But God, I don't like this, but I know your character, and I realize I get it, you're promoting me. And then Joshua's name's real interesting. It means dog. And it's actually If you look it up in the Strong's Concordance, they have a politically correct meaning of that name. They said it means faithful companion. But that isn't what it means. It means dog. But there is something to be said. What Don was saying about loyalty. See, you cannot have a commitment that says, I'll never leave you, never forsake you, unless you have some loyalty. Because affinity will not last. Affinity will wane or get old. And that's where if you don't have loyalty, and I made a note about how Dawn was talking about spiritual dads, moms and dads. You know a spiritual mom and dad when there's reciprocity in the relationship. You know, I've seen leaders that it all has to be coming their way. It's all about them. I've seen leaders take and take and take and take and take and give nothing back and expect you to be thankful for the opportunity for them to take and take and take and take and take. And they see the stewardship of what they claim they're giving you is the opportunity for them to take from you, and aren't you appreciative? I made this note. I said, loyalty without reciprocity is a recipe for broken relationships.
Every time.
Caleb's name meaning a dog, that's actually, in the time that his name was given to him, this word was actually a euphemism for a male prostitute. And what are we saying? It's like Don talks about being addicted. We think addiction is a bad thing, but Don talks about being addicted to the kingdom.
Yeah.
What I see in that is Caleb was sold out. He was so sold out it seemed inappropriate. He was inappropriately sold out. It was like my wife had a family member one time, blew up at her, and said, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Everything's not about Jesus. Do you have to talk about Jesus all the time? All this Jesus stuff. And this was a born-again person. Because she was sold out. She didn't have anything else to talk about but Jesus. So Caleb was someone who was sold out, inappropriately sold out. I made a statement, and it really came to me in prayer. We're going through this time where we're teaching now in Psalm. 8 years ago, I prayed through the book of Psalms. And because I couldn't, at that time in my life, I couldn't relate to the Lord's Prayer. It was just too composed. It was too much composure, and I was desperate. So I was more appropriately, I felt more affinity for David's prayer life. Break their teeth out, God! Break their arm! So, yeah, I want to pray like that. So I prayed through the Psalm. 150 days I prayed that way. And if you're not going to do it, I'm tearing this page out of my Bible. And Kitty's sitting there, quote boss. But at the end of that time, God catapulted us into a worldwide ministry. And now 8 years later, 9 years later, we're now teaching through that book. And it's like a parenthesis in our life. I told Kitty today, I said, we're on the verge of a great transition. We're turning a chapter in our life because now we are giving away to others that which so seminally changed our life by now teaching what we walked through way back then. And I made and as I was praying, when God first showed that to me last week, I told Kitty, I said, really, it was a dangerous prayer. So we had a dangerous prayer life. It's either this is the Word of God and it's reliable, or the way we're praying, we're actually apostating ourselves. We're giving ourselves so violently to this that if it's not true, we've put our salvation in jeopardy. Praying dangerous prayers. No, take no prisoner prayers. This is either is what it says it is, or this is not the Word of God type prayers. It wasn't fun. but it did produce. And it was wholly inappropriate. Just night before last, I'll be sharing some on this between now and the conference, and I'll talk more about it in the conference. But very seldom, it does happen to me occasionally, and always is at a point of tremendous shift when God's about to do something really major. I hear the audible voice of God, and night before last, I heard the audible voice of God, and He said something to me so it's like, my first thought when I woke up, I said, why are you talking to me about that? I get in enough trouble in that area. How come you're talking to me? Talk to me about something else, because this is controversial. And He just poured it on. I woke up, and He just began to speak to me and show me. And I know what He's doing. He's going to want that to be brought out and to be made manifest. And it's going to be controversial, and it's going to scandalize some people. And but for the people that get it, I think it's going to be a big deal. And I know it is. And but it's certainly not of my choosing, because I'm controversial enough in that particular area.
What area is that?
You'll be hearing about it.
Like, which one are you talking about?
We'll want to know.
Yeah.
Inquiring minds.
Yeah, and I'm not baiting you, honestly. I'm actually going to touch on some tomorrow on Morning Light. And again, and really, it's not so much by my choosing. I'm compelled to do it, because I know when I hear God like that, it's really, it's important that it be brought like fresh manna. If we leave the manna, what happens if we leave the manna? It breeds worms. So we got to get it out there. And so we're going to get it out there. And but it's transitioning from necessity to transition to conquest. You really have to stay flexible. You know, Numbers 14:23 gives us a clue when it says, Caleb had another spirit. He has fully obeyed me. Well, that goes back to that euphemism about a male prostitute. In other words, he was inappropriately sold out to the point of scandal, scandalizing everybody with a level head. He said in Deuteronomy 1:36, God was talking to Moses about Caleb. He said, I'm going to give him the land that he has trodden on. You know, and we're always in place of shift. We're always moving. We're always, how do you walk? You progress by steps. You never arrive. Well, this side of heaven, we're always in transition. And this is one of the things I told Kitty before the ministry got to where it is today. Success is its own, carries its own validity. There are people who won't gainsay us because they've seen that God has given us success. Like the person that told me, well, if God's not mad at you, I can't be mad at you. I thought that's pretty thin endorsement. It's like, I'd like to be mad at you, but I told Kitty, I said, it's a really dangerous place. And it's interesting because David prayed that way. David would say, you've smitten all my enemies on the cheekbone. Would you please have mercy on me? Because he understood the danger of being in a place of victory. In the midst of victory, and everything you say and do becoming as effective as if God said it or did it, is a place of great vulnerability. Every time Kitty and I have some massive breakthrough, we'll usually spend the next free time, the free days we get, we spend them on our face saying, God, take care of us. Keep us in a state of vulnerability. Keep us sensitive to your spirit, because we feel the vulnerability there more than we have our enemies at the gate. And because I told Kitty, I said there will come a day that the momentum with which we are pressing into the kingdom is suddenly going to produce, and then we're going to be tempted to get comfortable and just coast instead of pushing the envelope. And it's one thing we want to hurry out of the place of pressure, and you do that, and you listen to God, and you break out into a place of blessing, now you want to slow down. Now, when you slow down, the python gets you. Like I talked about the python who attacks slow-moving prey. And then you wonder what's going on, and you have this roller coaster relationship with God. No, you don't let the place of blessing be a point of pause for you. He says, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, the violent take it by force. The kingdom has a velocity to it, and it is a constant state of forward momentum. And you have to keep moving with it. And you only have so much time to stop and smell the roses, because you can slow down like David. Pushed his border all the way up to Babylon. Let's take a break. Went up on his rooftop. Didn't work out very well. And others we could go into. He said, I'll give him the land where he has trodden. Committing to God's process. We all want breakthrough. Breakthrough is an event. But the most powerful thing, the possessing your possessions, is about process. Nobody likes process. Because you embrace God's process on your feet, and it requires something of you. Maturing, not feeling like you've arrived. Nobody's giving a testimony about God's process. It's always about breakthrough. See, we have an event. We mark those as the most profitable things is God's process. If you understand what I'm talking about. And of course, Caleb said, Joshua 14, 6 through 12, he told Joshua, he said, give me my mountain. Give me my mountain. That mountain had the Jebusites on it, and from the days of Saul, nobody had been able to get rid of them. And the days of Saul, this Joshua, but they hadn't been able to unseat the Jebusites. And Caleb, so here Caleb is past his prime. None of the young guys could do it. How many of you ever said, I know I've said it, I've had God tell me things and I would say, God, that's a young man's game. My dad, as a pastor, he's 82 years old, and there have been many times in his life, he told the Lord, God, I'm not looking for any opportunities. I need somewhere I can settle in here. You ever see somebody sitting in a place in God, and they're just waiting for retirement? They're just coasting until Jesus comes. But Caleb was addressing the most difficult, intransigent problem that existed in Canaan land. He said, I'll take that. It's like God when he looked upon Paul, breathing out threatenings. The first century Osama bin Laden. He said, I'll take him. All the other guys were out there, oh God, I put my life in your hands. He was shaking his fist in God's face, killing his kids. And he said, I'll take him. To challenge the greatest, most difficult problem. To figure out where the enemy territory is and advance right in the middle of it. And pop up and say, hi, how you doing? God bless you. Come here, give me a big wet kiss. We've done it, Kitty and I, many, many times. And it's never without challenge. It gets you a little anxious sometimes, it's a little breathtaking. What am I doing here? Why did I, it's like the patrolman that we were walking around our town on the interstate in Clinton, Missouri, and a patrolman pulled up behind us and beeped his siren. He said, y'all need a ride? Kitty turns around and says, no, we're doing this on purpose. It's like, are you sure? You sure you're supposed to be here? Yeah, we're doing this on purpose. Sometimes you have to see, we tend to recede from the pressure. We run from the pressure. You let the pressure place you. But Acts 14:22 says it's through much pressure or tribulation you enter the kingdom. That means you have to learn to push into the pressure. You learn the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, the violent take it by force. You stay linear in the pressure zone. When even things, it's not working, stay the course. It's not working, what did I tell you? It's not working. Keep doing what I told you to do. What did I tell you to do? You press into the kingdom, you push into the pressure, you break out of the kingdom. If you get cyclical, start repeating the same unproductive decisions in the pressure zone, that's the wilderness. The transition season was not intended to be a place where you spend decades. It's the shortest point between A and B. You get through it and move on. But because of decisions they made, they kept receding away from the pressure. And they're going round and round and round and round and round. You have to get linear in the pressure zone and push into the pressure. The very thing that's the most challenging for you, and you push into the pressure, you break out into the kingdom, which is righteousness, peace, and joy. Righteousness is everything you say and do becoming as effective as if God said it or did it. Most people get in the pressure and they want, okay, what's God going to do about this? No, it's what are you going to do? He's already done everything by giving you the overture of letting you get in that place of pressure in the first place. Now keep pressing in. It's what you do that is what's going to produce what He's already promised. And you just have to keep moving in. And that's where the peace is, and that's where the joy is. David had the joy. He figured that out. By the time he started writing the Psalms, he figured that out. And it was a joyful thing. He anticipated in the Psalms, he was in the midst of pressure and difficulty, he was anticipating the goodness of God. Not because he had a scripture, but because he had a track record. I know you, God. I was in a position like this at Ziklag when all our kids and wives were kidnapped, and I remember how you worked that out, and this looks just like this, and I know you're about to do something really good, and so bring it on. Learning to navigate these grounds. And some people can handle Canaan, but they can't handle the wilderness. Some people can handle the wilderness, but they backslide if they're in Egypt. You got to identify where you're at. Necessity, it's not my choice. I wouldn't care to do this. I don't want to have to do this, but you do what you have to do in the place of necessity. And if you will do that, it's like the situation I was in. God will cause you to take total authority, blessing, and benefit out of that place that I did not want to be. But God made me the possessor. He made me the doer of everything that was done in that very pagan atmosphere, just like Joseph. We're in the place of transition where your life is being directed and misdirected by the unbelief of the people you're associating with. That's a tough one. And as Caleb and Joshua put up for 40 years, put up the consequences of somebody else's unbelief without faltering and saying, forget this, let's go to Canaan. Or forget this, let's go back to Egypt. Wow. And then getting into Canaan and saying, I paid my dues. Now you guys get up there and you get them Jebusites. How many of you see people that do that? Been there, done it all. Yeah, we were prophesied back in 1948. Ain't nothing new. Armchair quarterbacks. The church is full of them. They don't know how to walk with God in the land of conquest. Selling themselves out, inappropriately so, to what God has promised, like Caleb.